So I'm going to hand over to Professor Francis now. And for our online audience, again, do add stuff in the chat bar so we can continue to stimulate and engage with you. And also, do think about your questions as we get to the end of the session.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'll have that. Thank you very much indeed. I was actually going to try and sit down then, and I realised there wasn't a seat for me. So for those of you who saw that, so thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to start just by, I think I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves again. You'll know everybody, but it's probably just best to get a sense of introduce. And then I'm going to ask them each to speak for 2 or 3 minutes about a question we have. So, Claudia?
So my name is Claudia Carter. I'm a professor in environmental governance and planning in the Faculty of Computing, Engineering and Built Environment.
And my name is Chantal Rodier. I come from Ottawa U at the University of Ottawa in Canada. And I have a few hats. So one of the hats that I presented tonight or today, it was the artist in residence at the Faculty of Engineering. And I teach in the Faculty of Art and the Faculty of Engineering as well.
Lovely to meet you.
Hi, I'm Andrew Newman. I'm a producer at Ars Electronica. I'm working on transdisciplinary projects across Europe and have a background as an artist. So.
Seamus Uhart, Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford University, head of Learning Experience Design for the Electives program.
Okay, Seamus, can I start with you, just because you're in the rhythm now, so if that's okay. Can you say a little bit about why you think STEAM adds value to society? What is it about STEAM that actually really can add value? And from your own perspective, your own work, how do you know that? What evidence do you draw upon?
The evidence I draw upon is when I think about what has actually transformed me, to your topic, right? It's like whatever words we want to call it, STEAM, design, learning experiences, what actually transforms. When I look back at my life, it's either the consumption or production of art, right, that has created those things. And it's not exclusive of those other things, right? And so when I mentioned the work on the Lenin bus, all of that is made possible through the S, T, E, and M, right? But it's that human engagement with those things in concert. And when you were speaking, it really clicked for me when you were talking about how we're all one, essentially, right? And there's a British philosopher, Alan Watts. I listen to a lecture of his every single morning. It's called the most elementary lecture that we were never taught. And essentially, he goes on to talk about how we are all one, and there cannot possibly be black without white, right? And he goes on, and it's a bit long of a lecture, but I was thinking, you kind of prompted me to think about that and going around with that, and I was like, can you have science without art, right? Or can you, and because some of the art thinking stuff, it's like, oh, well, what actually drives curiosity, right? Like, do you even have a scientific method if you don't have that initial response, emotional response to want to learn more? And so I feel they are all connected, and that frankly, there's no other way but through that. And whether we want to call it STEAM or design or anything, I think the challenges of today absolutely demand an understanding that it is all connected, and the leaders of tomorrow must start that journey now to really understand how to take these things on.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, can I come to you and ask you the same?
Yeah, I think for me it always sort of starts again about why we have the A there, and why did we bring this in? And like at art school, my professor was always sort of emphasizing this fact that the artist has this sort of unique license to be able to like cross borders. They don't need to explain why or what they're doing. They don't really need to sort of be comfortable in an environment. They're sort of switchboard operators. And this sort of skill is something that I kind of took for granted at art school as an artist. And then when I started working like with engineering and software development and sort of like with scientists and projects, I realized that this is something that not everyone has. And this is why I think STEAM is is important as a concept is this ability to be able to sort of like move and go across things. And this ability to move, like how is that created? Because you need to know where to move. We're often sort of stuck in these little boxes. And this is when I think about what does art do? And I always like, when I'm explaining what art does, it's like, you know, we always think of aesthetics and seeing things, but it's when you see a work, it should sort of, you're looking like this, and it just allows you to like shift slightly. This slight shift in perspective is what artists can do. It can only be minuscule, but that slight shift really allows us to see the world in a much larger way. It allows us to empathize, allows us to listen, and being able to sort of like see more makes us respond to sort of the issues that are out there, and being able to sort of work across different problems that we would not even recognize because we're stuck in our bubble. So I think STEAM allows us to sort of, to see more and to feel confident and empowered to sort of move and to not be too scared to sort of like, to cross over. And often I think that's something that we take for granted, that ability to sort of like go somewhere very foreign and different. And this is something that STEAM empowers you to do, I think.
Okay, thank you. Chantal?
I'm impressed with the answers. But I have a little cheat sheet, because, you know, to help. But personally, I'm completely and deeply convinced that art and STEM can actually lead to transdisciplinary knowledge creation. And I think that's the pursuit that I'd like to achieve in the courses that I have. But I think in any kind of a situation, I think that's where a society will benefit from these kind of groupings of people. And whether it be with artists, engineers, or any discipline, I think when you work as equal collaborators, when you respect and you truly listen to what's happening, and when you trust in the group, and the trust is established within that group, and when conflicts can be resolved in a very positive way. I think conflicts in terms of ideas are very positive, and if they are integrated by all parties and all views, I think that's where the experience can be completely transdisciplinary and knowledge can be transformative. And what I see the role of the artist in this is that art really offers a unique lens to be critically examining things. And this is typically of good artistic training as part of that. But it offers to kind of force STEAM teams to slow down, to question things, question the why, as I presented earlier, but also challenge the accepted notions, and make visible what is invisible to society, or what is assumed and not questioned. So I think the art in STEAM is very powerful from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. Claudia?
So I'm part German, and I grew up in Germany. So if I get an email saying, you got 3 or 4 minutes to present something, I think presentation. So I actually produced 3 slides. So forgive me. You never lose it. Yeah, see, look, maybe it's also a female trait. We take things very seriously and very accurately. So anyway, so for me, just as a background, I love butterflies and I love nature. And I think that was a very early thing for me. So I was part of the Scouts in Germany. We're not distinguishing between male and female, we're all thrown together, yay! But holism already, but also it means I spend a lot of time outside with very basic comfort, and everything you had, you carried with you for miles. And I always got blisters, but I didn't care. And I think a lot of my motivation later in life is I don't distinguish, I don't see things quite so split, I just look at it. And I think in nature there is a lot of science, there's a lot of art. So, for example, I did geology in my first year in Aberdeen because you're required to do social and natural sciences. You could do everything together. And I didn't actually pass geology very easily. It was due to a very nice old man who coached me through an oral, because I was so fascinated by the geology of what you saw through the microscope rather than looking at the science behind it. I just looked at it as an art form. So I never did terribly well in the spectrography, because I was dazzled by it in an artistic sense. It was pleasurable. I didn't want to learn which crystal exactly actually caused this. So it's an interesting mix. On the other hand, I really love sciences, and I think you really should know your stuff, especially in terms of the environmental state. So I just take this a little bit as a very quick explanation of how I see it. So I think there's science, there's art. We munch our way through things. We sometimes crawl, but for me, STEAM and design thinking project I went through, it helped me actually to fly, to be actually colorful, more colorful, happier, and to fly. And I just wanted to explain why, and that relates to the who, what, and the how. So just quickly, the next slide. It won't take long, it's just one more slide. So first of all, the who. I think what I learned through design thinking approaches, and it's very important, and through STEAM, was first of all, that some things are very strange and very conflictual and seem problematic, but you just have to give it time. You don't even have to interfere. Sometimes you just have to give it time with people. And we found that through design thinking processes, people worked it out eventually, similarly through STEAM. We sometimes felt at first, oh, that's awkward. Oh, that's a troublemaker. We just left it, and eventually they bonded and they produced something. And that is a very interesting thing. And similarly, now when you get in a classroom, you don't label people. You're just in the classroom and you work with them. You learn who they are, you learn what they need, and you work with them. And that is a different way. You see the coloring and the motivation and the approach does change. And at first I didn't even notice it just happened. It was only when I was asked, so what did actually change, that I thought, yeah, that actually has changed in the last few years. I was quite open-minded, but I still have changed. Learn to let go. Again, I really like quite having things, if you suggest something is a really good idea, you wouldn't just wipe it away. But I think in design thinking in STEAM, it's very dynamic, and lots of different things, and some very good ideas get sidelined, and other things get pulled in. And by the end, something wonderful happens. A bit again like the butterfly, all these ingredients come out with something wonderful. And also to learn to trust other people. I think sometimes I'm also quite harsh, high expectation levels, sorry. But I learned to let go of that, and actually if you really trust people, and if you really throw yourself in it, I think something good can happen. And if people also feel that you trust in them, they actually are, I think you bring out the better person in them. And then you also learn to trust and be kinder to yourself, which is also important. So I think I start for myself because that's what I have control over largely. The others around me, I can influence through who I am, but they have to decide who they are and how much they engage. And therefore, I also think it's quite useful just, it's not because I'm egotistical, I hope so, at least I'm not. But I think you can actually change yourself a lot and therefore also change things around you. And therefore, but for me, it was also not to get totally stressed out at university, but actually be happy. And to be honest, the balance is sometimes quite challenging. Anyway, so I think it changed my collaborative attitude. It changed how the sharing gets easier, but also the genuine caring and interest. Because I think we can show interest, or we feel socially, you have to be interested in that. But generally, being interested is something different. And I think the genuineness, and I find, for example, I have problems with some of the politics and the rhetoric of governments, national, local, any level, because a lot is rhetoric, it's not genuine. And I think any conference I've entered this year, which had to do with STEAM, so it was ICEA in Barcelona, and a hybrid conference in STEAM, they were always genuine. And the atmosphere of being with genuine people and in a genuine working atmosphere was wonderful, really liberating. So just very quickly, the final slide, and then I show up for it's just, I think processes are important, but mindset is just as important. And I think also institutional culture. And I think we have a variety here. We have some really good stuff, but we also have some real issues. Toxicity is horrible. And toxicity, unfortunately, creeps into a lot of institutions. How to get rid of it, I really don't know. But it is just, it's like a crushing rock coming down on you, rather than when I read the principles and I feel, I come out of it again, and I can operate. How I think a lot is really with others rather than for others also. I think it's a very different attitude. It's to experiment, not to be afraid to experiment, and also to challenge myself. If I do always the right thing, it's worked last time, just do it again. You bore yourself, so it's quite nice actually to experiment, but also that then forces you to look at things differently, and I find you actually, with this openness, you learn a lot more and you look at things differently, and the arts quite often helps me as a jumping point, as a creative sort of inspiration to look at things differently, and therefore I learn a lot from it that goes well beyond, the artistic spectrum. So creating and being critical, be it a critical friend or feedback, or a critical voice also, being a female, member of a university, we sometimes do struggle a little bit more, and we sometimes do take a bit longer to get from A to B. So there's a lots of interesting things we sort of experience on the journey. But this year has been a very good year, so I enjoyed that. But I think it is partially because I've learned some things on the way through DT and STEAM that really helped me look at things differently, but also be different.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to open it up to questions in a moment. But when you're talking, I get a real sense of STEAM as fluidity, liquidity, a real sense of porosity of disciplines and working together. You mentioned dynamism and so on. I suppose the question I've got really is how do you stop people like me or institutions creating, if you like, just another STEAM discipline? How do you keep it fresh and engaging? And I say that as a criminologist, in a way where criminology was a vibrant, dynamic. We knew more about what we were against than what we were for. And STEAM in some ways feels a little bit like that, and it's certainly in its earlier days, very much challenging but still finding its feet in terms of that creation. How do you keep STEAM fresh when the institutional logic is always to pigeonhole, and institutional leadership, myself, so I'm the crush, if you like, how do we then make sure that we don't do that, and then we don't create actually what STEAM is against? Anybody like to go for that one? Oh, I hope there's some questions out here now, so Andrew.
I mean, I could just sort of comment, that's sort of been brought up across all of our sort of points just then, is it's very much focused on people and these aspects of like trust. And when we talk about true collaboration, so this is something that you can get through STEAM, is you're not instrumentalizing people, you're not instrumentalizing their skills or their knowledge, but you recognize all of the value in what they are. They are not their profession in a sense. And I think by focusing on people and focusing on creating the spaces for people to interact and not sort of necessarily sort of shape STEAM as a discipline, as sort of a thing unto itself. I think what Christopher mentioned today about art thinking being a way of thinking, it's not a methodology. And I think also when we were doing the STEAM project, we were very much sort of like had problems with talking about methods and approaches and definitions. And it's a mindset. It's very much like emphasizing that it's a mindset where you are listening, where you're empathizing, and where you're working with others and different types of knowledge, different types of cultures, and knowledge cultures. And sort of that involves also learning how to value and respect different cultures. And I think this is something that is just always sort of emphasizing that everyone has a voice, everyone should be listened to, and everyone should be valued. That's something that will immediately sort of avoid sort of like trapping and sort of like I can't think of the word right now, this overbearing sort of a pressure that often comes with institutionalization. And I think institutionalization, if we think of it as an institution, is a space for people. It's a collection of people. It's a collection of ways of working together. It's not sort of like a structure. It's just a space. And I think this is what's fantastic, and as you were also discussing about STEAM House and what's happening in Birmingham, is it is focusing on the fact that this is a space, it's a place to meet. It's not sort of like saying that this is what that is. It's saying, here, come, like we build it and they will come. And I think that's a really good way of approaching it and avoiding this sort of the threat of institutionalization sometimes.
Wonderful. I think that's really, really, really powerful. Chantal.
I just want to add, I hear two things in your question, is how do you make it happen in a university-style setup, which is silo-based, is one, and the other one, how do you keep it fresh? Based on what we've done, I definitely recommend, from the success that we had, is to find champions across the pond or across the divide is really key. It was key for us anyway to make it happen across faculties, which have their own priorities, their own budget, their own everything, and their own ways of promoting their faculty members. So there's a whole set of challenge there. But I'm very strong on where there's a will, there's a way, and I think when you find the people with the same mindset of making things happen for the better and the good of the situation and education in this case, it happens, and it can happen. And as far as keeping it fresh, that's a challenge, I think. But I think good projects, meaningful projects, and really focus on innovation and really making good in the world, I think, is a self-driving engine that, especially our young students are really hungry for, not angry for, but hungry, kind of angry for as well, but hungry for, making a difference in the world.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Seamus?
So one of the things that we do when we talked about unbounded problems, real-world projects, and radical collaboration, kind of the three tenets that the D School tries to pursue in its learning experiences, when I'm introducing myself to a class or students, we're not necessarily faculty or professors. I try to position myself as the lead learner, right? And so that allows us to say there is no sage on the stage or someone that's kind of directing it. There's infinite kind of methodologies or other ways, but we're leaning into a process. And so that opens it up not only for the students to feel safe, to kind of be fresh, but also it allows then for us to lean into the other thing, which is real world projects. And when it's fresh for the teachers, it's fresh for the students, right? And they sense, you're talking about authenticity, right? Like the students know when you're riding like right on the edge, right? And an example of that is the class that I had mentioned, the one with the astronaut, that class, a handful of those students went into their second quarter, which was around redesigning finance. Because we were doing a real world project, the project partner was the state of California, and it was the Office of Emergency Services, and we were looking at post-disaster finance. And specifically, there was a fire in a town called Paradise that burned the entire thing down. You mentioned fires in your home. California's suffering, like very similar. That was all teed up, and we had that, and people were really excited because it was a very real threat. A couple of weeks before the class even started, the pandemic hit, and because we already had that project partner, that office was now trying to figure out how to do like these emergency loans that were basically being issued by the federal government and the state, and we were able to pivot in weeks, right, to that. And the students they felt so incredibly fresh because they were working on a problem that they were seeing unfold in real time. It was almost to the point where it became stressful, right, because you're trying to just cope with like what the hell's going on in the world, to now also feeling like, oh, I have the agency and I'm learning tools to actually apply to that. And so that's probably, a very on one side of the spectrum of like switching 2 weeks before, but positioning as a lead learner and then leaning into real world projects, I think will constantly keep it fresh, and it puts pressure back on the institution, right? Because the students will call BS, right? Where it's like, this is what they need in the market or in the industry, and this is not what I'm being offered here. Can we get this? And so it's for senior leadership, it's an awesome feedback loop, right? Of like, where do we need to shift and what isn't being serviced in the way that it needs to be? So I'd say those two things are ways that I've personally found to keep it fresh.
Super. Claudia.
I pinched one point from Seamus actually from earlier on, what I've picked up when I joined late because I had to teach. But what I liked really hearing was focus less on targets and give more direction. I really liked that phrase because I find targets can sometimes set you a goal, isn't it? But targets, especially if it's metrics and if it's very set and very mechanical, it loses quite often a lot of that qualitative and of that life and of the flexibility. And I think for something to stay fresh and meaningful, you need to have that judgment and that flexibility. And so I like much better direction than targets. I always win still a bit, especially when we have our annual reviews and the target setting is now very much targets. Okay. But to keep it fresh, I think the other thing is universities, and we talked a bit about that, is a lot is about multi- and interdisciplinary, we said. The transdisciplinarity is, I think, a bit more tricky, and it shouldn't just be industry. Quite often we interpret as business and industry, but there's a lot more than that, because as you said, it's also societal and the other aspects. And I think if we set directions, but also listen to the whole range within the whole university, not just academics, not just managers, but also I find always in my undergrads, to me the technician was just as important as my lecturer, because the technician helped me fix a desk. The technician helped me with my siphoning of my sand in the erosion experiment. But we quite often just ignore them. The cleaner is important, the food production is important, and every person in the university, whatever rank, all together, we make it a good university. And sometimes some of the really good ideas actually come from people who mop the floors and see things and think about things from a very different perspective than we would do as an academic. We just sort of a bit more blinkered sometimes. And I think it keeps fresh if we keep open also and allow literally not just to listen to a certain grade or listen to a certain group, but be able to walk around and listen to the variety. And it does take time, but I think that keeps it fresh.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to that about targets. And I think I work on a lot of European projects, and I spend a lot of time measuring and evaluating impact as like sort of very sort of set, what the KPIs for this and I think this is something often in universities as well that we kind of forget about. What I think to measure, I think we really need to sort of measure impact. I think we need to reflect impact, but I think we need to think about it beyond sort of these sort of quantitative ways and think about telling the stories. And this is like if you are able to, like as you say, pivot very quickly, that might not align to what the targets are, but you will have a fantastic story, and that shows the impact. And I think also when we discuss like stories, and you'll bring up about sort of the widening of this university, and you don't need to worry about the metrics and things, but actually to think about the transforming the learners, their lives, and what's going to happen, and that was sort of very fresh already for me to hear often coming from sort of like leadership positions at university, to think about actually the learners and sort of their stories and how they can be transformed. And I think this is why, again, bring it back to people. If you kind of just think about sort of individuals sometimes and the impact that can have, that's enough to measure.
Yeah, I mean that's really important, and I suppose colleagues who work in UK institutions, the challenge we've got is a regulator who is only interested in metrics, so actually isn't even interested at all in narrative or impact or lived experience. So we've got a real challenge as leaders also to try and reshape and reform that way in which they listen and the way in which they engage, because otherwise they just say, well, actually, you're here, and we need you to be there. And actually, that gap can be consisted of a range of narratives that actually can explain the difference. So I really, really agree. Can I just take questions? So you might want to introduce yourself, and then...
Thank you. Ara Zaman. Just over 100 days ago, this city played host to about 42 sports ministers who came to your city here, the Commonwealth Games sports ministers. What's interesting about those sports ministers is that often they don't just do sport. They have a portfolio which covers sport, youth. In some countries it's sports and arts. So my question is, where do you think the discussion today, and maybe this is going to be picked up tomorrow, or the joining up that you've been talking about, one of the biggest gaps I think that we have is joined up government. Yeah, joined up at both across different departments. So you have what you just talked about from DFE, but maybe another department wants exactly more qualitative. So you have that joined up approach there, but you also have the joined up approach between city and national, at that level. So my question is, where do you think, based on any of your experiences, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere or US, where do you think where and how can STEAM play a role from the perspective of where we sit in academia or whatever, in helping government join up more?
Right. Who would like to... Andrew.
I mean, this was something that we looked at in the STEAM Inc. project very much about sort of how this sort of can be applied within policy. In the UK, you actually have an aspect of this with the Open Policy Lab, which we had we had a guest from there who was a graduate of the Art and Science program at Central St. Martin's, one of the programs. They'll bring in all of this art thinking, design thinking, and STEAM stuff in terms of policy. But that doesn't change institutional structures often, and I think it's again, I would say, in all aspects of policy, like it is really about sort of storytelling still. It's very much about kind of getting the story out there over these metrics and across to sort of to kind of campaign. I mean, this might sound sort of slightly dirty word to talk about like campaigning, but campaigning is like sort of like really sort of trying to sort of speak over the sort of the way things are structured sometimes, because people can much more easily listen. I think very much like when you're talking about analogies. And I think this is something that if we can use analogies to kind of communicate across these things, it does allow this to happen. But yeah, I think it's, you know, breaking up the barriers between local and national, and this is something that I don't see a way through STEAM. But I think these methods of like of empathy, listening, storytelling, generation that kind of studies here hopefully can start to bring that stuff in when they sort of like enter that area.
Thank you. Claudia, are you going to come in then?
Yeah, I was sorry, but yeah, thanks. I think some of the methods that we developed of approaches, they actually lend themselves to opening up people and talking more across the boundaries. And I think in that sense, I love methodology from a research, but most people always think, oh, the literature review is the big thing. For me, the methodology is the really delicious thing. Because I think if you develop good methods and processes, it can help that process. It's not the only thing, but it can help to create connections. The other one is, I think because if you have too many targets, you're just focused always on meeting the targets, you need headspace. And I think there was actually signs of more collaborative and integrated government across national and local, but it got beaten out again with more recent changes. And so I think it is possible, it's absolutely possible, but first of all, you need the headspace, and then you also need some processes, and I think you also need people who challenge. So you need to actually rebel, and the question is sometimes when and how do we rebel? Because increasingly also rebellion is seen as something very negative because it impacts on economics. It's always then pointed out how you then therefore affect some social, how we would, for example, in our case, disadvantage people who don't have much money, paid a lot to be at the university and want their education. So you see what I mean? So there is some contradiction, but I think we still and I hope we have spokespeople, and I think universities have to be really outspoken, and therefore we have to embolden and support our senior leaders to speak out to government that some of their policies are not going in the right way.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Andrew?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's important also to like zoom all the way out and just realize how much of a privilege it has been, and as humans to even have this fantasy that policies are real, or that borders are real, or that jurisdictions are real, right? These are all created. And I don't know about you, but I know many of the fires at California don't stop at the border, right? And many of these massive problems that we have, I think we've just run out of runway to have privilege and ego saying where we're gonna draw these lines. The solutions demand collaboration, and you know, the more time. And we see this everywhere, from what's happening, you know, in England right now to you can throw a dart at the globe and call out where that's falling apart, right? Like how we manage institutions. So I think that we've just run out of runway now, and all of those solutions for the very, you know, big messy ones are going to certainly incorporate everything we've been talking about today, and it's just going to force our hand, right, to seeing that the solution, we have to come together, right? I don't think that's going to be easy. I know that's like zoomed out, and I think it's actually going to be messier before it's cleaner, but I think when we think about where we are in time and space right now, we're on we're in a time where there's a generation that didn't have, the internet, and there's a generation that knows nothing beyond, without the internet, right? And then there's a generation or two in between, and so it's a massive, massive paradigm shift, and we get the great fortune and privilege of trying to figure out how to make that transition that's literally just in mindset, right? To think we can even go, I don't know if we're going to even go further than that in our time of just shifting from how we think about these things. So,
okay, Chantal.
I just wanted to add that probably one of the things that we can take out of the STEAM methodology in this case is how to go across discipline divide, like government department divides, and take that into that space and build the greater good as maybe not a target but a directive. Necessity. Yeah, a necessity. Yeah. Exactly.
But it is very much about, when you were talking, all of you, it is about recognizing that power, those power dynamics in some ways, and looking at how you can challenge or address or work around through different means, etc. And I always think that sort of power challenge sometimes is lacking in some of the debates around STEAM, because often we're talking a group which is often inclusive, engaged, willing, and able, and enabled, but actually the wider, I think the discussion about politics and policies, that is about power. And it is about dynamics and material power differences within, and it's about how do we use STEAM, not a question now, but to really self-reflect those power dynamics in a very positive way. And I think that's the real challenge. There's a question over here. So,
thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Roy Priest, Head of Digital and Media Technology Department. And as such, I've been involved in STEAM-based courses since before STEAM was even a thing. So the kind of courses that I've been involved in as a course leader and as head of department, things like BSc Music Technology, BSc Computer Games Technology, etc. And what I've witnessed is the enthusiasm and the real love of the subject area born out of the artistic side, which underpins the learning of the technology. So I've been quite lucky to have witnessed that for many years. You can get students to learn programming quite happily if you highlight the fact that we're talking about developing an audio plugin, Similarly with the computer games course, it's programming, it's computer science, but in the context of a computer game, so you've got that buy-in. So that's the good side, right? On the other side, I've got 3 kids who are all grown up, have all been through the UK education system. My wife's a primary school teacher, and as such, I've witnessed the marginalising of the arts in schools, right? So my question is really, is it part of our job? Maybe, and I appreciate the panel's very much an international panel, and I'm not too sure the extent to which my question translates beyond the UK. But bearing in mind that marginalisation of the arts in schools, is it part of our job in higher education to counter that in terms of STEAM and design thinking?
right, who would like to tackle another large question?
I think we have to address it somewhere. So if in the UK it's not addressed, and same in Canada really, the arts, and you have Sir Ken Robinson here has spoken a lot about creativity and schools and how it actually kills creativity. But we have to address it. If we don't address creativity, which often is an outshoot of the arts, we're, again, that word that I'm referring, we're in trouble. So if it's not addressed at the high school or primary level, I think we have to address it in higher education, because I think problem solving is very dependent on our artistic and creative ability, and needs to be developed somewhere.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I don't think it's limited to the UK at all, although there's quite some extremes here. I remember during the sort of leadership for the Conservatives, Sunak was saying that they would like to sort of prioritize funding to educational degrees based on the sort of earning of those graduates, and that would completely eliminate the arts, which is the lowest earning potential in of all the degrees. That's like people like Dyson, Ive, Bowie. So all of these art school graduates would just be like wiped out. And I think this is a question of values. And I think what I was also discussing during our session, that we really need to emphasize the values of these qualities. And sometimes this requires adopting sort of like the neoliberal terminology and working out how to measure things, but it's something that often in the arts people don't do. In Sydney, like there used to be, like, when I was studying at art school, it was like 4 art schools in the city, and now there's like 2, and they're just like dropping off, and people just expect people to go, no, art is valuable, like it's art. And that needs to be explained better at a policy level and at a political level. And it's not often does. Artists sometimes, and culture and arts, just expect to be like, so it's value because it is. And this kind of arrogance sometimes is destroying. We need to explain why, and it's not sort of a problem if we need to explain why. It's something we should be able to do, and I think that's why we really need to discuss the value of these things. It is valuable, but if no one's saying it, if everyone's just saying it is because it is, there's no way to win.
Okay, and certainly, this university has a key leadership role in relation to articulating the role, the value of the arts and culture, and we'll continue to do that everywhere we go.
And it comes,
Hi,
back to your pancake situation as well, right? We have to use the pancake situation for the arts and talk about it.
Hi, is it Claudine, the lady in the orange? Claudette? What was your name in the Claudia. I don't know if I'm making a comment or a question. I'm really, really glad that you raised the point earlier about the different levels of people who are involved in innovation and stuff like that. Very, very glad that you mentioned cleaners. My mum was a cleaner. A lot of I come from a working class background. A lot of what I know comes from my mum being a cleaner in fancy places and seeing what she sees. And we're talking a lot about values and all sorts of stuff, but what of those people who hold knowledge and can bring some new sort of dynamic thinking to solving big questions, who don't get to go to university because of the cost? Because I don't know, they might come from a working class background and just haven't got that chance. I'm hoping that this place will come and work with academics and other people, because a project that I'm looking at is really looking at the types of knowledge that some people who, for instance, what I call the have-nots, who are just in neutrals. Women, for instance, have got loads of knowledge and they've worked out loads of problems. Women that comes from various different countries, basically, who have had to figure out how to work things out because of lack of money or things like that. So I've sat here thinking, okay, where do I fit in here? How can we be part of this? And all that sort of stuff. And we've talked a lot about, I've heard you talk about stuff, some of the things have gone over my head. So it's drawing back to this whole idea of power dynamics. And you all are the powers. And we are the have-nots, where I come from in neutrals, but yet we've got good contributions to make. There's loads of things. How are we going to become part of this and to work on that? Because I'm an artist. I'm currently looking at Caribbean folklore to look at what inherent knowledges are in there. Caribbean folklore will incorporate, loads of people came to the Caribbean, the Germans, the Africans, the Indians, all sorts. What knowledge did they bring? What knowledge was retained within that folklore? That's something that I'm hoping to join up with academics and things like that and look at creative ways to look at that. I have no idea what would come out of it,
but I do know that my mum came from really up in the hills in Jamaica, and she had some massively brilliant knowledges that I'm seeing being sold now, some of the things, cures for things and stuff like that. So while we're all talking about this, how exactly are you looking to involve folks who are not academic, who don't even know what the arts are? Because I didn't even know what the arts was until I got to 30, I'll be honest with you. I'm not stupid, I just wasn't around this type of culture. So yeah, how are you going to incorporate us lot, the people like me, the have-nots?
Okay, just a very quick comment. So in the past, we would have done it through some research projects. But the problem is sometimes the research projects are very much framed by the academics, not necessarily with the people. And I think that's the other thing. I think STEAM and various other, I think, changes and realizations is also now that either the requirement or because we think and do things differently is now that through contacts that we make, we actually co-develop things much earlier and much better. So I think it's maybe not ideal, but there's certainly the interest to do so. And I think European funding quite often was also very open to having lots of case studies and working actually with, sometimes also national funding, to work with communities. So it's not so much, but I think the problem is with the academic and with STEAM, because it's largely academic driven and academic discipline, that we also allow the framing to happen with the people, not just for the people. And I think some do it, some don't. And it's not all possible. But having spaces where you come and where these conversations happen, that's how you influence it, isn't it? By just having spoken out, I'm doing this, I'm interested in that. You have a room full of people and somebody maybe later on says, oh, who was that lady who attended that STEAM conference and such this? Because we want to do this and we need somebody in the community. That's how I think it happens. But you're absolutely right, and I suggested at the STEAM, when we talked of STEAM at the BCU level, I said actually, and probably Peter remembers it, I said what we actually weak at is connecting better with community. We're very good with business, we're very good with SMEs, we're very good with large industry, we are not so good with community. So we put it on the agenda, and I think they've heard it, but it's sometimes a bit slow. But I think there's certainly lots of interest across different departments, different people to do so.
For me, I mean, just picking up Claudia's point, it is about lived experience, and it is very much about the institution recognising that a space like this isn't an ivory tower, isn't a closed space, is a very open, it's very radical, it's very welcoming, and it is very much about listening to lived experience. But we also need to recognise that people aren't going to come here as well. And we have to take STEAM out to communities. STEAM has to be participative. And to be participative means you go and take STEAM and engage, not wait for others to come. Because actually we don't tackle half the problems and some of the issues you're raising. So for me, participation, and it is about openness and lived experience. And that's a good challenge, Joe, in relation to how we take the building and the contents and the people, because people lies at the heart of STEAM, how we share and shape and engage that in a community setting. Pardon? Right, okay, I think we're running out of time. We've got time for a very quickie in the room, but also online.
No, this isn't online. This is just an observation I was going to make. Yeah. Oh, right. No, sorry, this isn't online. No, I really have found it interesting, the panel, because I think it's fascinating, really, because I've worked in STEAM for quite a long time, and it's looking at like the artist's role and the learner who are in the creative industries. They've got such an important place and a role to play within the STEM agenda. They have to grow up quite quickly, don't they? Because it's like a portfolio career that they end up taking. So they've got to kind of think very strategically, very early on, is where they can apply their knowledge to a certain sector in the arts. And I find that really, really fascinating. And, it is about kind of that recognition. And I liked what you were saying, Chantal, about, really celebrating those champions. Because, the arts has always had a problem about being accountable, hasn't it? People haven't been able to measure it necessarily as something as easy as some of the other subjects. So I just find it, how do we really celebrate those champions and build these champions within an institution? And it is about that real recognition, isn't it, of these individuals who just play such an important role, but who are really working in such a strategic way at such a young age to think, well, where is my journey? My path isn't as linear as other subjects, you know, and I think it's really about celebrating that and recognizing that better, you know, so yeah, so it was a bit more of a kind of like observation kind of thing.
Thank you. And I was just going to go on my soapbox a bit, I suppose, as well, which is when we talk about the arts, I think we should also just recognize that the arts are also closed in some ways. So it's not as though we're standing here saying, actually, the arts are the most radical, open, freestanding, free-flowing. They are also rooted in history, in knowledge and in power and standpoints that actually is also very disruptive and also very problematic in relation to how we put arts into STEM. So there is a bit here about how we really shape arts and culture as well as we shape STEM to recognise that we are opening up the whole of those letters and what stands behind them, not just the STEM element of it. So that's really important. There was one gentleman here, I think, for one final standpoint, and then we're going to pull it to a close.
Just going to ask a very, very quick question to the panel. In the UK, we have something called the Research Exercise Framework, REF, and universities push their academic staff and all of the staff to have outputs in these various, refable categories. And I mean, I work in biomedical sciences, and the problem, correct me if I'm wrong, but the problem is that a STEAM publication doesn't fit into any of our REF components. And so how do you encourage staff to engage in STEAM when those STEAM outputs aren't recognized as part of their performance?
Impact case study. So there's two things. You could do an impact case study instead. So with the publications, but showcase what you've done through STEAM. And I guess most people would publish maybe something that fits more also into their traditional departmental structure alongside STEAM. I don't know anybody who only produces STEAM at the moment.
And I think that this fits really into that challenge you were talking about before, you know, about metrics, about how we're judged, and, you know, our careers are dependent upon X or Y, but actually we want to be Z. My sense is actually, though, you can do both. And there are some really good examples where good institutions where academic staff have used their disciplinary journals, those 3, 4-star in the Word, to demonstrate STEAM. And actually the narrative has played over. It's not ideal, but it plays out within an environmental statement, it plays out within an impact statement, but those publications have also gone in as well. And certainly as we move up to 2028, STEAM has to be part of BCU's agenda for REF planning and REF how we explore. First of all, we've got to decide what UAAs we go into, and secondly, we have to decide how we create a greater interdisciplinary framework within which we do our research. So my sense, we will celebrate both disciplinary depth and also STEAM-based activities in any of our submissions. Just how we play that out.
Just comment to that. So yeah, when the art universities were integrated into the normal university systems in Australia, they then had to sort of work out a way to measure the research impact in a system that was designed specifically for this academic points. Like ideally, you need to change the system, but one of the best ways to measure the value of these things is to use one of the great STEAM skills, which is hacking and gaming the system. It's totally possible to work out how to create the points from the outputs that you're doing. It's not an either or, and it's just involves some imaginative, creative thinking, and sort of applying it to sort of ways to doing that. You can make a publication out of a STEAM output that does fit into the points as well. It is possible. It's just working out how to do it. But yeah, just hack the system.
Can I give an example of hacking the system? Is it? Oh, there we go. Dr. Henry Lee, School of Medicine at Stanford University, was teaching a class with Jules Sherman, who's a design practitioner in the healthcare space. They taught a 2-quarter class. Dr. Henry Lee procured a grant from the School of Medicine to do some research and then write a publication on the role of storytelling to develop empathy in med students. And they approached me because this is before I was head of learning experience design. I have an MFA in documentary film, and they said, "Can you help? We want to take some of this grant money, and we'd like you to produce films about a day in the life of people with chronic illnesses, and we're gonna test to see if that impacts how these med students understand all of the impacts of chronic illness." Right. So that was the pitch. My counter hack to that was, well, we have the technology, and making films isn't like incredibly difficult. I don't suggest we make your doctors or the med students here filmmakers, but we can certainly teach them with the tech, create a design challenge around making a day in the life films, right? And essentially what happened then there for a quarter, pre-med students did design research and really understood what a day in the life of these people living with chronic illnesses was. They created films. That act is an incredible effort of synthesis to commit to like what is happening in there. Yes, it's filmmaking. Yes, that is an art, and I, again, MFA in it. But it was the medium towards that, right? To them really understanding what the impacts were so that they could provide better healthcare services to people with chronic illnesses. And to this date, that's the only paper that I'm listed on because I don't have to publish, right? But Dr. Henry Lee was able to write not only to get more grant, do storytelling to tell the impact, but then also get it peer-reviewed and published with his findings. And so I think that's a good example of radical collaboration and kind of rethinking, like, with that cone, right? It's like if you're looking at it with just one tiny hole, that's all you're gonna see. If you say, well, wait a minute, the answer's always right here somewhere. I just need to hack until I figure it out. You can come up with different situations where maybe the faculty's a project partner, right? Maybe they're bringing in their research or design work in there and leveraging the students and the radical collaboration of all that in there. And right now, one of the things that I'm trying to get into the electives is having a faculty member on every one of the teaching teams to bring not only that real world aspect, but also the academic perspective on it. And then that gives them that avenue to write and publish on it without taking on the full weight of also being a teacher, right? Because that's another balance that's happening in academic. You know, your research work and your teaching can be challenging in and of itself. And so team teaching allows you to get your foot in there without taking that full burden on yourself.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, I think we've come to the end of our allotted slot. Most of my colleagues have now stood up. I think that means bring it to us. So, Seamus, Andrew, Chantal, Claudia, absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Your appreciation, but I sense the fact that started before I finished demonstrates how good that was and how challenging, and thank you very much indeed for your engagement. Thank you.